Hey, everybody.
What's going on?
How we doing?
Welcome to this is the third episode of the After Action Report. Obviously, I am not in the illustrious studios. I am on assignment in Wisconsin. Mike is home and at the studio in his
Right.
locale.
The Port Jeff Studios.
Yeah. But we are joined with none other than the illustrious and benevolent Phil McArdle. How are you, sir?
Good. I'm doing great.
You're looking good.
Thank you.
I haven't seen you in a dog's age.
That's true. That's true. We got to get together more often. That's what we surely got to do.
Unbelievable, right?
Yeah.
Remove my camera. There we go. That's better. Much better. So, what's going on? So, just give us the quick rundown of who you are, what you did, why we care about you.
Oh, I don't know if you care about me, but basically, my name is Phil McArdle. I'm a charter member of the New York City Fire Department's Hazardous Materials Response Team. I was with them from the very beginning back in 1984. And as the Hazmat grew in the New York City Fire Department, I grew with it, if you could say. I got involved with teaching, doing some writing, doing some course development work, and pretty much I was on the ground floor on just about every aspect of Hazmat in the beginning.
I love it.
And that's the part that is the fascinating part to us. We absolutely want to hear about all those beginnings, all the things that the frustrations, the anxieties, the learning to put the pieces together, all of it.
In the beginning, it was really tough. And when I say it was really tough, coming from the New York City Fire Department, one of the biggest problems is tradition. And when I say tradition, tradition impedes a lot of things. There was an old analogy that people used to use. The New York City Fire Department, 125 years of tradition unimpeded by progress.
Yes.
And
you'll know that tradition still holds true.
And as part of that, when you take any new unit in the New York City Fire Department, especially one that was so far from what people were used to, and now you're going to take this and you're going to implement this, and you have people who in a department who always learn from their chief officers from the top down. So any of our fire experience, any of our fire knowledge came from years and years and years and years of experience. Well, when Hazmat came along, and Hazmat did come along kicking, screaming, and grudgingly onto the scene. And what I mean by that was there was an incident that happened on the George Washington Bridge back in 1980. And it was on August 9th. And there was a propane truck that was going over the George Washington Bridge. It was headed northbound on 95. And it had a leak in its safety relief device. The safety relief device was a spring-loaded safety relief device that wouldn't close properly. It was frozen in the open position. So what happened was the truck was on the bridge. It was leaking propane. Nobody knew what to do with it. It got stuck there for hours. Traffic backed up south on 95, all the way down the Jersey Turnpike and as far north as Bridgeport, Connecticut on the other side. And what happened was the federal government estimated that they must have lost $1 billion worth of commerce that day with nothing moving. And they told the New York City Fire Department that you're going to get yourself a hazmat team, or you're going to get something to straighten this out, or we're going to cut off your federal highway funds. So as part of that, they took a company, Rescue 4 in Queens, And they said they started giving the rescue companies all kinds of special assignments. Rescue 1 was a dive unit. Rescue 4 was going to be the hazmat unit. So in the very beginning, Rescue 4 was doing hazmat work. And the problem with that was that they were being taken out of the borough of Queens to do hazmat calls in other boroughs. Now, this infuriated the then Queensborough president, Donald Manis, and he was constantly complaining to City Hall that his one rescue team for his borough was constantly somewhere else doing hazmat work instead of doing fire duty in in Queens. So what they decided to do was they were going to make a totally independent unit. And this unit was going to be quartered in the quarters of Engine 288. And that was located on Maspeth Avenue, right near along the Long Island Expressway. And that location was selected for a specific reason. It was close and easy access to get on most of the major highways and arteries in New York City. You could go right to the Midtown Tunnel, get into Manhattan. You could go on the BQE, go to Brooklyn and Staten Island. You could go on the LIE and take care of parts of Queens. You could get on the Van Wyck Expressway and head towards the Bronx. So it was simple. That's why they chose that firehouse. So in choosing that firehouse, there was also some other unique things that they had to do. This was normal fire companies in the New York City Fire Department and manned by 25 firefighters, 3 officers, and 3 lieutenants and a captain. This unit was going to be staffed with 35 firefighters, 3 lieutenants, 1 captain, and 1 administrative officer. And part of the reason that they needed more people was because they were trying to follow certain protocols. They had like in any engine or truck, everybody has assignments for fires. Well, in hazmat, the assignments were you had a 2-man entry team, a 2-man backup team, a 2-man decon team. You had a resource person plus the officers. So that was an 8-man riding list. Because there was 8 men, another unique problem developed that they needed more than 1 vehicle to transport personnel. So it ended up being a 2-vehicle operation.
So can I just ask you real quick?
Naturally, sure.
You said that, so they were protocols. So we're in the beginning, where did these, like protocols come from? Because this would have been between 80 and 84. So there really wasn't a lot set in stone nationally, right?
No. As a matter of fact, this is part of the problem. If you look at some of the federal laws and regulations, a lot of them, like SARA, Superfund Amendments and Reauthorization Act, that didn't come into effect till 1986, which more clearly defined training and training requirements and stuff like that. So before that, what it was Rescue 4 went to a few select schools. There was no standard number of how many hours you had to train or anything like that. And because of that, it created some problems. And some people thought that 24 hours of training was adequate. Some people thought that 40 hours of training was adequate. And from my perspective, when I started to go to school, every time I went to school, I realized how much stuff I didn't actually know that I really needed to know in order to do my job properly and safely. So in the very beginning, 40 hours of training is what they were going to give everybody. And so the Rescue 4 went to 40 hours of training. Then they were sent to the National Fire Academy to take the 40-hour Hazardous Material Tactical Consideration course. Then they went on and took the 40-hour chemistry course. And once they had that training, the job washed its hands like that and said, that's enough. That's all they need. And that's where we're going. Well, as I said, Donald Manis had complained. They decided to make a unit. Now they sent us to school. In some respects, that was their biggest mistake because some of us, when we went to school, we quickly realized that, hey, the amount of training they're giving us is not enough. We have to advocate for more. And unfortunately, in advocating for more, you make some enemies. Perfect example: when we first started, we would get replacements or details from the 4-6 Battalion manpower pool. So they would just send over 2 guys not trained, and they would fill the decon spots every tour. So now we're working with people who have no training at all. So we went from we're going to train everybody to we're not going to train everybody. And some of the chief officers' priorities were staffing issues. They were not really concerned about safety or training issues. So so that was a constant fight. And as time went on, and some of us became more and more knowledgeable about what was required, we would get to a point where push would come to shove, and we would have to insist on either not doing things or insist on more training to do certain things. As an example, and I can give you a few as we go along, but I'll just give you one right off the top of my head. Initially, we were being sent to some incidents that involved asbestos. They had these steam leaks, Con Ed steam leaks, and down in Manhattan, because Lower Manhattan used steam to run a lot of the power plants in some of the office buildings. So when a steam leak would occur, the steam pipes were wrapped in asbestos. If a hole blew out into the street, the asbestos went all over the place. So at this one particular incident on 23rd Street, now keep in mind, the hazmat guys were asking for asbestos training, weren't getting it, okay? We go to an incident, there's asbestos everywhere, on the buildings, streets, cars, people, everything's covered. It's like snowing in July. So they want the hazmat guys to get up in a towel out of bucket and wash the building. Now, up until this point,
familiar.
up until this point, the only people who had asbestos training were the officers. They were only going to send the officers and none of the men. So they tell us to get up in the bucket, and one of us reminds them that we are not trained to do asbestos. Only the officers are, so they have to get up there and do it, not us. And we're telling the chief of department this. Naturally, he's not very happy. He says, get in that bucket and get up there and wash the building. And we said, look, chief, we're going to go up there, but you're going to have to tell us what you want us to do each and every step of the way. Because remember, we haven't been trained. So we go to get up in the bucket, go up. By the time we get up to the top, he consulted with the health commissioner down on the floor below, down below, and they basically said, hazmat, come down from the bucket, go back to quarters. We don't need you. The captain of the company came in that night and said, the guy who was responsible for this won't be here tomorrow. He'll be transferred. I'm going to headquarters tomorrow, and he'll be gone. So the captain goes to headquarters. He goes into the commissioner's office. The commissioner says, I know why you're here, and you know who is not going anywhere. He's staying right where he is. So it kind of made them have to take a back step. And 2 weeks later, everybody in hazmat is scheduled for asbestos training. So
would you say you've always been a bit of a pushover? Or
yes.
Is this, that's...
Yes. Well, you know, one of the things that I think is important, and for anyone in hazmat, especially in hazmat, today you have to know the laws, regulations, standards, and directives well. And you have to understand the hierarchy of documents and where they relate to other documents. In other words, when you have conflicting information, which document takes precedence? And that was a thing that a lot of people didn't seem to grasp, but a few of us seem to grasp very well. And when I say grasp very well, the issue always comes up about what you're allowed to do and when can you do it. And I had a very good chief that I used to deal with all the time, and he said to me, I was reassigned once to help make the new hazmat operations battalion, and the chief in charge, a good chief officer, his name is Jim Bullock. He says, "Look, Phil," he says, we're gonna do train these guys, okay? And when we're training these guys, we're gonna send the firefighters for X amount of hours of training, and then we're gonna send the officers for X amount of training. I says, okay, chief. I said, how many hours are you gonna want to send everybody for training? He says, I think we're gonna send everybody for 40 hours. I said, okay, chief. I said, I handed him a list, a paper, and on this list was all the different things that a hazmat person had to do. I talked about meters, trucks, transport, rail car incidents, maritime, aircraft, the 5 modes of transportation. I talked about fixed facilities, gas stations. I talked about monitoring devices. I talked about all of the equipment I had. I said, you see each one of these categories I have here, chief? And it was like 3 or 4 pages long. I said, each one of these is going to require at least an hour and a half of classroom training, not to mention the hands-on training that we're going to have to do, because they are supposed to, according to the regulations, you're supposed to have the knowledge and skills necessary to perform the work task. So we can't just tell them this is how it's done. We have to make sure they know how to do it, that they're physically able to do it. So he looks at the list. He says, okay, I think we'll start with 80 hours. He said, but I'm only going to send the officers for 24 hours. I says, chief, that can't do that. I said, he says, why can't we do that? I said, I'll just make it real simple for you. I'm going to take this and I pick up, I don't know, something that's on his desk. I'm going to say, we're going to make believe this is a monitoring device. And I'm going to walk around this room here and monitor this room. And you're going to tell me how I did. So I take the thing, I walk around the room, takes me 5 minutes or so. I come back, I say, well, what do you think? He says, well, that was pretty thorough. Then I proceed to tell him everything that I did wrong. Okay. Now he realizes what's happening here. I'm putting him on the spot because I'm saying, look, chief, you're sending somebody to supervise me. If they don't know if I'm doing something wrong and I commit an unsafe act and I get hurt, who's liable here? I said, the officer working has to be as knowledgeable or more knowledgeable than the people he's supervising. Otherwise, how does he know when they're committing an unsafe act? And not only that, every person who's working, we're supposed to use buddy system. What does that mean? It means that when I go in with a buddy, I'm observing his actions and he's observing my actions. And when he goes to do something that's unsafe, I'm supposed to, don't do that. Don't do that. And if he does that, gets hurt, what's my responsibility? Is it to help him, or is it to make sure or ensure that I get him help before I try and help him? Because if I don't understand tactical priorities, what ends up happening is I could be trying to help him and then myself get incapacitated. And in non-line of sight operations, if people can't see what's going on, they don't even know that we're hurt or we need help. So fundamentally, training is the most crucial part of hazardous materials response. The men have to be trained properly. And not only do they have to be trained properly, they have to be properly supervised. And you always have to remember that for every task you want people to do, if you want them to handle flammable liquids and gases, you have to give them training in flammable liquids and gases. If you want them to recognize explosives, they need to know what explosives look like. If you want them to handle radiological materials, they need to know the dangers of radiological products and how to monitor those areas and stay safe Stay safe when you're looking for this stuff. So all of these things are essential. And what you have to help you is, laws are written by legislative bodies. The laws themselves are very complicated. And because they're complicated, what happens is every time a federal law is written, an agency of the federal government is tasked with writing a regulation that tells you how to comply with that law. Okay? Right. Now, there are 50 titles to the Code of Federal Regulations. They cover everything. They cover from the Office of the President. They cover Title 14 is the FAA, so everything to do with aviation. Title 29 is labor, everything to do with workers. Title 49 is transportation for the 5 modes of transportation. So it's well thought out. Now, in Hazmat, when you start looking at federal regulations, and let's just take 29 CFR 1910-120 right off the bat. When you look at that federal regulation and read it, it tells you a certain amount of things. It'll say must and shall. Those are things that you really have to do, okay? And when you have to do those things, it kind of means that, yeah, you got to train people to do that. And in 1910-120, they talk about buddy system. That's why you're not allowed to work alone. That's why you have an entry team, a backup team, a decon team, so that when they're in there working, they can observe each other's actions and intercede if something is going to happen. And if something does happen before they can intercede, make sure they get help for the person who's injured. So that's one example in a federal regulation where buddy system is an issue. But when you start, like I said, when you're reading 29 CFR, it mentions other federal regulations in that same regulations. It talks about bloodborne pathogens and infection control. That's 29 CFR 1910-1030. It talks about the respiratory protection standard, 29 CFR 1910-134. It talks about confined spaces. 29 CFR 1910-146. So every time you look at something, it's like an octopus. You get involved in one thing, and it brings you to other things that you have to do. Now, lots of times you have people who are not fluent in a lot of the stuff that goes on with the federal regulations. So I kind of made a simple matrix that for officers to follow when you're not sure of the regulations. And it's just a 4-step process. When can I work safely? The first, do I have the knowledge and skills necessary to perform the work task? So not only do I have it up here, but do I have it here in my hands? Okay.
Right. Next,
do I have the tools and equipment to perform the work task? Well, just remember, we're not only teaching people about the knowledge and skills they need to do the job. Now we have to teach them about the tools and equipment that they're going to use to do the job too. So it's knowledge and skill based for the tools and equipment. Now, once you get past those two, the next one is, do I have the right personal protective equipment to do the work task? In other words, do I have to protect my skin? Do I have to protect my respiratory system? What do I have to protect my skin against? Fire? Do I have to protect it against chemical? And with each level of protection, the individual needs to know how to wear it properly, how to properly don and doff it, how to take it off in an emergency if they have to. Because how many times have we heard about firefighters wearing firefighting gear, going into a fire situation and dying because they have a heart attack because they're struggling to get out of their breathing apparatus because it's hung up on something. So when we teach people about wearing protective clothing, we're not only teaching them how it protects them, we got to teach them how to survive in it and what to do when things go wrong. Okay, so those are the three main elements: the knowledge and skill about the work you're doing, the knowledge and skills about the tools you're using, the knowledge and skills about the clothing you're wearing. Now, the next most important part, weighing the hazards and risks. Well, that's the supervisor's job. He has to look at every component that those guys just did, what they're working on, what tools they're using, what protective clothing they're in. And he has to say to himself, are these guys working safely or not safely? Because it's my job to supervise them and make sure they don't get hurt. Because if I'm the supervisor and they get hurt, part of that is on me because I didn't properly weigh the hazards and risks. So when you look at those four elements there, if you're not doing all four of those, you can't work safely. If you're doing all four of those, then you can work safely.
Bill, I got a question for you because last night we had a show, and the topic of the night was SOPs versus SOGs, specifically for hazmat tech people. And Bernie Welch asked the question. He's hoping that it comes up, and we were figuring, me and Mike were arguing that technicians have a much more relaxed set of SOPs, SOGs, if they're there at all, because at a certain point, the runway runs out, and that's where you have to think out of the box. What was the original thoughts on this back in the day, before SOPs or SOGs were even a thing?
That's a difficult question, and I say it's a difficult question because with SOPs or SOGs, some people use them as hard and fast rules. Some people use them as guidelines and they give you some latitude to deviate. Okay. Now, the certain times that you can deviate from an SOP or an SOG, if you will, if you can justify why you're deviating. Okay. And when I say deviating, when you deviate, if nobody gets hurt, nobody gets killed, no major property damage, no major mistakes, and you made a deviation, that's fine. If any of those things happen and you made a deviation, there's going to be repercussions. And right. anytime that you don't go with a tried and true practice, you better have a good reason for not going with that practice. Now, I'll give you an example of one of the times where a chief officer made an error in judgment. Okay, not his fault. Not his fault. Hazmat, newly experienced company in the job, right? We get to the scene of a rollover. Truck's rolled over on its side, okay? Leaking saddle tanks, fuel spilled all over the street. Get the fuel spilled, picked up. Hazmat's using its airbags to lift the truck up so they can get some chains under it to get a purchase on this thing to upright the truck. Okay? Any of us who went to rigging school know that you have two trucks on one side to lift it up and one tow truck on the other side to hold it back so that when it's coming over, it doesn't come all the way over. So here's a trucking company, very experienced in traffic accidents, knows its stuff, right? The two guys on the scene say, we can lift this thing with two trucks, no problem. We don't need something holding back. The safety chief is there. The battalion chief is there. What do these guys from Hazmat know? They don't know anything. This guy has been doing trucks for years and years and years and years. We're going to go with what this guy says. I says, Chief, I'm telling you right now, I'm going to tell you exactly what's going to happen before it happens. These two trucks are going to go to pull a truck over. The truck is still loaded with a liquid inside. Once that truck gets to a certain point, the truck is going to go over and it's going to flip the other way, right onto the other side. The tow truck driver says, that's never going to happen. Chief, we've been doing this. You don't have to. He don't know. He don't know what he's talking about. Chief says, I'm gonna let these guys do it. This is their business. They know what they're doing. We're gonna let them do it. Well, it didn't take long. Got it up. Soon, bang, right over the other side. Now the stuff is leaking all over the place. Chief looks at me, looks at him. Chief looks back at me. He says, I'm sorry. I should have never doubted you. I says, Chief, let me tell you
Damn
something.
right.
I said, the department sends us to school to learn this stuff. My job here is to make you look good. It's not to make you look bad. I said, if I tell you something, you could take that to the bank, that's the way it needs to be done. When these other people, so-called experts, start telling you this is the way to do it, and you have somebody who went to school to learn how to do it, and he's telling you, don't do it that way. Don't do it that way. You know, that's where you learn, you know. So as far as SOPs and SOGs, if your department writes them, you should use them. You also should do critique after every incident. And if you're using an SOP and it didn't work, or an SOG, you should seriously think about looking into making some alterations to that so that it works.
But that's like trying to sometimes, carve a 13th commandment into the tablets.
Well, that's one of the problems, Mike, with the fire service, and not just with the fire service. It's with the military. It's with law enforcement too. They're heavily ingrained in their doctrine and what's worked before and what's worked for years and years and years. But you know what? As time marches on and technology changes and equipment changes and the vast use of chemicals today as compared to years and years ago, everything's got to change with time. And even SOPs that are tried and true sometimes in the new world don't work.
Yeah, we've definitely had a few instances where you have to push back against against a chief's officer or push back against SOPs, and you just kind of hope that when you're not allowed to push back against that SOP, that everything kind of goes right. And unfortunately, sometimes it goes right, sometimes it goes wrong, and it's very difficult, I feel like, to when you have an operation that's going against the grain because of stuff that other people don't understand, to try to get them to go in that direction becomes very difficult.
Well, one of the biggest problems, Mike, is this. And I'll use New York City as an example, but New York City is not the only one that's like this. Unfortunately, when Hazmat came along, we didn't train from the top down. We trained from the bottom up. And because of that, we had many chief officers in the job who had no experience in dealing with a hazardous material company. Not that they haven't had experience in dealing with hazardous material, but they hadn't had any experience in dealing with a hazardous material company. Somebody who's now going to school and learning how to do it and following federal regulations. A simple thing like picking up a hazardous material and taking it back to quarters to get it out of the street. You can't do that today. Years ago, how many times did a fire company take something back to the firehouse that they shouldn't have taken back? But now chief officers are educated. They know that. They know not to do that. But as a matter of convenience, people used to do that all the time. And the worst thing that could happen is you're taking something back to quarters, you get involved in an accident or something, and now you're the spiller. Now the engine company that's transporting it.
Even you having it on the rig is now you're a transporter of hazmat.
That's right. Where is the shipping manifest? Where's the shipping manifest? And the company will say, "What are you talking about? What are you talking about?
What?
You're not supposed to be transporting that." So I mean, we learn and hopefully in the learning process, we don't get too many people hurt or killed. Sometimes it's trial and error, and unfortunately, that's not the way it's supposed to be. The the best thing that any department can do is get a few people well trained and well educated in the laws, regulations, directives, and standards. And when I say that, knowing the federal regulations is a hard chore just by itself, because you have to constantly watch for changes, because the Federal Register changes every day. So there are changes to regulations every day. Every day. I'm not saying there's changes to hazardous material regulations but there are changes to the federal regulations every day. So you have to be vigilant about that stuff. You have to know, and the other thing too is, when you look, if you put laws, regulations, directives, and standards on a scale, okay, at the far end is laws, okay? Now, if you're not in compliance with the laws, there's some criminal liability there.
Right.
But between laws and standards, okay, because standards is what a reasonable person would do, a reasonable person concept. And usually, if you're exceeding the standards, you're less likely to have a problem and there's less liability. But that area of liability is from the Code of Federal Regulation right to the NFPA standard. So as an example, if you used 1910-120 as the law that you're looking at, or the regulation that you're looking at under Superfund, and the standard that you're using is NFPA 472, the closer you are on that scale to 472, that shows how much liability you have. Because when you go to court, if somebody's injured or killed or there's major property damage, a jury is going to look at a reasonable person concept, and that reasonable person concept comes out of the standard. It doesn't come out of the regulation or the law. The regulation or law is the bare minimum you have to do. And when you tell people that you're trying to get more training for your people, and 40 hours is not enough, they go ballistic when you tell them that 29 CFR 1910-120 is the minimum we have to do.
Right.
If we want our people to be good at what they do, and not only good at what they do, but work safely, not get hurt, not create any major problems in doing their job, you have to train them much, much more than that.
Yeah.
And you guys have seen this over the years too, and I'm sorry to interrupt just one second, but we all know that in the beginning, 40 hours was considered acceptable amount of training for a hazmat technician. There is nobody in their right mind today who will tell you that 40 hours is an acceptable amount of training for a hazmat technician. Agreed?
Yeah. Agreed, 100%. I mean, I could see an argument being made not for first responders, but for industry, where, you have a very, a responder in a facility that has a very narrow set of situations in which they may encounter. I could see that being justified as a 40-hour technician, but not in the emergency services first responder world.
But it depends on what they're doing, Mike. And here, let me give you an example of that. IBM had a semiconductor facility in East Fishkill, New York. They had a full on-duty staffed hazmat team, okay? And the reason they did was because they had 3,400 exotic chemicals on site. If they had a leak or a problem, they needed somebody to handle that. They couldn't say 40 hours is adequate for those guys.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So It depends. If somebody's just moving around barrels of one particular product, and you thoroughly train the people in the hazards of that product, and you give them the right clothing, and you give them the right tools to do the job, 40 hours might be adequate.
Bruce says hi from IEC.
Yes. How are you, Bruce?
So what are some of the things that when you guys were coming in 1984, what were some of the biggest hurdles that you had in starting up this company and moving forward, not just with training, but with
Staffing,
anything?
staffing was like one of the biggest problems in the beginning because we were fighting everybody to try and keep the place staffed with trained personnel. And that was one of our biggest problems. And the other problem was getting people away to schools. Perfect example, National Fire Academy. Back in the beginning, the class was hazardous material tactical considerations. It was changed to hazardous material operating site practices, which was a much more extensive course later on. But let's talk about the tactical consideration course for a second. When we were trying to get people into that course, there was, I think, at the height of this, there were 10,000 applications for 300 positions at the National Fire Academy yearly. So if you weren't selected, you weren't getting in. And it may have taken you a long time to get there. That's when the National Fire Academy started to do outreach programs and stuff like that. But in the beginning, you had hazmat teams that were hard pressed trying to get into schools, the EPA classes in Edison, New Jersey for us. And it wasn't just a hazardous material tactical consideration. It was the chemistry of hazardous materials classes. Training for hazmat guys didn't start to open up until we started having all of these terrorism problems in the United States. That's when the money started to flow. And not only the money started to flow, but more and more schools started to open, more and more training opportunities became available for guys. Guys were going to the bomb school in Socorro, New Mexico. Guys were going to the radiation school at the Nevada test site. They were going to Fort McClellan, Alabama for live agent training. They were going to Texas A&M for ICS training.
When did that start to come into fruition? I mean, people forget that we had more than just 9/11.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff started to come into effect when Howard Safir and Tom Von Essen were the commissioners. That's when hazmat really started to flourish. That's when we opened up a hazardous material operation command. That's when we got involved. Remember the sarin incident in the Tokyo subways? Well,
Yep.
I was teaching the Chiefs course, and one of the things I would say to the Chiefs all the time was, I said, "Look, I'm going to give you a situation. I want you guys to tell me what you do." I said, "Okay, we have a number of civilians go down in Grand Central Terminal in the main vestibule area there." I said, "First responding units getting to the scene and they're going down." I said, "What are you going to do?" So they think about it for a minute and they say, "We're going to call hazmat." I say, "Okay, now I want you guys to think about what you just said. You have civilians down. You have a full first alarm assignment. How many companies is that? 3 engines, 2 trucks, right? Possibly a rescue and a battalion chief. How many men is that? Roughly 40 or
40.
more, right? Agreed?
Yep.
Now we're going to send the hazmat unit there. 7 men who have a 2-man entry, a 2-man decon. They're going to have to get in chemical protective clothing because the people are going down in bunker gear. So what does that tell you about the product? It's a skin absorbed, fast reacting chemical. It's not radiation. It's not biological. It's a fast acting chemical, and people are going down. Okay. So you have 2 guys, a 2-man entry team who's going to pull out 40 plus people, plus God knows how many civilians. I says, how's that going to work? And they're all sitting there and nobody's saying a word. And I said, guys, the problem that we have here is we have to come up with a strategy that deals with a situation like that. And that's when we decided on making the decon engines and the CPC trucks. The whole purpose behind the CPC trucks was to get them to a scene like Grand Central Terminal. Everybody get the equipment on and get in there. Now, here's the thing. I know what everyone's going to say. Oh, well, that means you got to train 25 companies at 40 hours of CFR. I mean, 40 hours of hazmat training. No, that's not what it means. Remember that matrix that I talked about in the very beginning where you have the knowledge and skills necessary to perform the work task, the tools and equipment to perform the work task, the right PPE to perform the work task, and you weigh the hazards and risks? Well, here's what we did. We developed an eight-hour program where we teach guys about the capabilities and limitations of the chemical protective clothing. We take them, we show them how to don and doff the protective clothing. We tell them what the limitations are in it, what to do if they run into problems. The tools and equipment we give them skeds that they can throw people on and drag people out. We teach them about decontamination, all right? Just the basic principles of going through decontamination, not doing it. Then we take those people and we run them through a task-oriented obstacle course where they have to do exactly what we would expect them to do in Grand Central Terminal with the people down. Now, we not only run the firefighters through it, we run their supervising officers through it, and we run every chief officer who is going to supervise them through it, including all of the safety chiefs. And the reason we do that is simply this. The company officers need to know what it's like for somebody to drag two people out. So they have to physically do it. The chiefs have to physically do it. And the safety chiefs have to physically do it. Now, if they can't do that on a bottle of air, go through this task-oriented obstacle course that's set up where they have to move obstacles, climb over obstacles, do a one-person drag, a two-person drag, and a four-person carry, and complete that all without running out of air, they fail the course. And they can't be in one of those units. We have to get them somewhere else. They can't stay there. Because the people who go to those units now, we're going to expect them to do this if we have a lot of people go down. So now I have chief officers who were running through this course, and one of the chief officers, safety officer, he fails the course. So we can't certify him. He says to me, and I think I'm going to get some repercussions because now I'm failing a guy in this, and he comes over to me, he says, that was the toughest thing I ever did. He says, I guarantee you, if I am the safety chief and we ever have one of these incidents, I am calling every single unit that has chemical protective clothing to the scene because there's no way that two guys on a truck are going to be able to come here and do this by themselves. So now, what have we done with this guy? He knows how difficult it is. He knows he's a believer. He gets to the scene of an emergency where you have an incident commander there who knows nothing about any of this stuff. And as the safety chief, the first thing that he says to the incident commander, you don't have enough CPC units here. Get more guys. He knows. He knows. He's been through it and he understands. So when we do stuff, we have to be innovative. We have to be creative. And not only do we have to be innovative and creative, but we have to address the need and not give them BS training that they don't need. Give them the essential stuff that they do need so that they can go in there and perform the work test that we want them to do.
You know, when I was running the technician school for a little while, one of the things is, as a fireman, and you were in the same position, all three of us retired as firemen, but I would go up to the battalion chiefs and I would say, hey, listen, I'm not telling you you have to get into a suit. I'm not telling anybody they have to get in a suit. But later on, when you're sending me downrange, you won't have the idea of how hard it is. So this is where you get in a suit.
Well, here's the difference. When I did this, I had a lot of support. And when I say I had a lot of support, there were times when I was fighting tooth and nail with people, but there were other times when I had a tremendous amount of support. Von Essen was the commissioner when this was going on. He called me and he said, Phil, he said, are we going to run into any resistance on this? And I explained to him just what I explained to you just now. And he said, do it. He says, if you have any problems, let me know. Nobody gave me a problem. All of the SOC chiefs went through it. All of the rescue officers went through it. Everybody went through this. And you know what? They all became appreciative of how hard it is and how difficult it is to be in the level A suits. Now, I will tell you this. There were some guys who had some apprehension. They were claustrophobic about being in those suits. They didn't like it. They didn't like it one bit. They were glad that Hazmat existed because they didn't want to do that stuff if they could avoid it. They did not want to do it. And that's the other issue is that, you know, sometimes you have to force chiefs to do things they don't want to do. You know, they all went down a hallway. Every chief has gone down a hallway. Not every chief has worn a hazmat suit. And the difference is when you're controlling people, that, you know, part of the reason that the rescue liaison unit was made or the rescue chiefs were made and the hazmat operations chiefs were made, it was to take the burden off other chief officers, other deputies, and other incident commanders about, you know, listen, this is a technical aspect of the job. Nobody expects you as the incident commander or the deputy to understand this. We will bring in chief officers who know these work tasks. And I'm not just talking about hazmat. I'm talking about high angle rescue. I'm talking about diving. I'm talking about collapse work. We'll bring in officers to help you who understand all of this stuff and let them be your guides in how to do these kind of operations. And that's how we do things today. You know, that
I have a question that kind of lands into what you were talking about. So a lot of what you're talking about now lands in what is referred to as mission specific, operations mission specific,
right.
Which sounds like it's something that you guys pioneered in the 90s to bring a lot of FDNY people up to speed. We've almost come like a full circle where you now have people with a little bit of understanding of this mission specific turning around saying, we don't need to stand up a hazmat team. We'll just get all our operations guys to mission specific. We can save ourselves a ton of money and time and training, and they don't really need to be technicians. They can be mission specific. What would be your response to something like that?
Well, here's the thing. What's the mission?
Well, I guess turning around, training them on the PPE, the PPE meters, decon.
No, stop right there. Once you say training them on meters, that opens up a huge can of worms. If you're going to train somebody and they're not going to be technician level and use a meter, do they know what they're reading? Do they know where to search for the product? Do they know the capabilities and limitations of the metering device? You know, you could give somebody a monitoring device and they could go into a room where a product exists. And if they don't know where to put the monitoring device, they'll never find it. They'll never find it. So the one example that I gave you about the Grand Central Terminal, that's a mission specific problem, where it's one problem and one problem only. People down, you got to get them out. That's the problem. When you start saying you want people to go in and monitoring, what kind of surveillance training are you giving them? Are you teaching them how to use the monitoring device? Are you teaching them how to zero the device? Do they know how long they have to stay in a certain area to search for that particular product? What's the product's vapor density? Where are they searching? Are they searching near the ceiling and the product is near the floor? You know, these are things that it's like I did with Chief Bullock when I explained to him. I says, "Look, Chief, I'm going to walk around the room. You tell me if I'm doing okay." You know, when people come up with this mission specific idea, Mike, I think you have to ask yourself, what specific missions are they talking about? You know, because even decon, something as simple as decon. What type of decon? How much? Are we making our own solutions? I was at an incident once where they were using diluted acids to do decontamination. And what happened, one guy who's mixing the solution says, well, if I make it more concentrated, it'll be a better solution. Yeah, but it will also burn the hell out of people if you put it on your skin, so those are things you have to watch out for. And I tell you, the only people, most firefighters don't take hazmat seriously. So we should all know that, okay? And they don't take it seriously because they don't think, go ahead.
All right, okay, finish up.
They don't take it seriously because, they don't think it's going to hurt them. I taught a radiation class in California, and we were teaching guys how to find sources. Couldn't find the source. You know what one of the guys did? He had it on his tongue. Okay? So you have to look at these missions that you want to give people and see, are they going to take it seriously and do the right thing?
So we're going to take a 5-minute pee break for everybody's benefit.
Okay.
So yeah, we're going to put it out, and we'll be back in 5, guys. Look at us.
Empty bladders, full cups.
That's it.
Oh, not mine. Ah.
Oh, so
All right,
should we dive into some of the questions?
Oh, you know what? I want to go down a little memory lane because he was in our department, in our company. You got out what year?
I got out in 2008.
All right. So, Mike, you came in what, 03?
I came in 04.
04. I got in 01, and we had some hijinks along with Mr. McArdle. There's so many things that used to happen in the firehouse that I know we can't even talk about. I'll mention one, and we'll leave it right here. Is remember the paint can on top of the lockers?
Yes.
All right, we'll stop there.
Yes, I know exactly which one you're talking about.
I've never seen you so mad.
We had some guys who were entertaining, I'll tell you that. Weren't very sanitary, but they were entertaining.
Most firemen are not very sanitary.
No.
You remember when we used to do the natural gas bombs off the fridge, off the grill, and we blew out the window out of the side of the firehouse?
Yeah, there's certain things I want to just not say. Well, some of those kind of things, I thankfully I wasn't involved in. I was involved in some pranks, but not those ones.
What, the pepper bombs? Oh my God, those are funny.
Yeah, I definitely had a few close calls with some pranks. One set of pranks we called Hazmat Jihad, and we used our knowledge of IED making to enhance the bathroom experience.
We had some great pranksters. We really did. Yeah, they were very good. We don't want to talk
what else
about
you got,
it.
Mike? You got some questions, right?
Yeah. I just some kind of coming into the own, as a hazmat unit. One, how did you even get started in hazmat? Like, what made you as a firefighter be like, this interests me?
Okay, that's a good question. When I graduated from Proby School, I was the valedictorian of the class, so I was allowed to choose where I wanted to go. So there was a firehouse in the Bronx, 58 truck. I knew some of the people in that firehouse, so I decided that's where I wanted to go. And when I got there, we were doing some reasonably good fire duty. There was a lot of great people there. It was truly a great firehouse. You could learn from a lot of people there. There was a lot of guys getting promoted out of there. They did a reasonable amount of good fire duty. And the neighboring companies were Engine 82, Ladder 31, 88 and 38 were on the other side of us. And it was towards the end of the war years. In other words, we were doing a lot of work, but it started to die off because of the fire department's Red Cap program. They saturated the area with fire marshals, and fires plummeted. I mean, went right to the bottom. I knew that that as time went on, fires were going to start going down and down and down. And if the fire department as a whole didn't start getting involved in other things, the number of fire companies would also start to go down as a result of that. And an opportunity came to go to hazmat. I was only a third grade fireman at the time. They were only taking first grade firemen, but I went. There was 125 guys who had volunteered to go to hazmat. Everybody had to go through an interview. I went through the interview process. I didn't hold any hope of getting called, but I got a phone call and said, "We're going to put you on the order to come to hazmat. Are you going to come?" And I said, "Yes, I'll definitely come." So we received the order. We went to the division of training for 2 weeks of initial training, 2 or 3 weeks of initial training. And then that was in September that we did that. And I think October 6th was the first day we went in service as the fire department's hazmat unit, all fully trained and ready to go after 3 weeks of training.
Oh man.
So that's kind of how it started. And then what they tried to do was they tried to start scheduling us for schools and stuff like that. Fortunately for me, I was one of the first guys selected to go to schools. And then what happened was I started to go to schools on my own too. And even though the job had sent me to the National Fire Academy for chemistry and hazmat, I went to all the EPA schools on my own. I went to a lot of other schools on my own. And as I got better and better at doing that, I applied to be part of the adjunct faculty down at the National Fire Academy. And the program chair down there, his name was Jim Covington. He was from the Memphis, DC hazmat unit, Memphis, Tennessee hazmat unit. So I went down and I was teaching with Jim. I taught with Jim for many years. He would always have people come in to teach. I would teach with him. It's interesting when Jim was retired from Memphis and he was working down there full time as the program chair. Now, when I first started teaching with Jim, he was teaching 90% of the class and I was teaching 10% of the class. When Jim was retiring, I was teaching 90% of the class and he was teaching 10% of the class. And part of the reason for that was because he had been out of it for so long, so much technology had changed, so many laws and regulations had changed, and all of that stuff had changed. And the guy who replaced Jim Covington was a charter member of Hazmat, Noel Waters. Chris Waters was the new program chair for hazardous materials down at the National Fire Academy. And so like I said, I was teaching down there for a while. As a matter of fact, some of the captains from the fire department who were going through the National Fire Academy ended up being my students down there. Jack Fanning was one of my students down there. Bob Ingram was one of my students down there. Al Schwartz. So I actually had a few guys who had done that. And then while I was down there, I was also working on a few projects for the National Fire Academy. And one of them was redevelop the Hazardous Material Tactical Consideration course. And myself, Dan Savello from Jefferson Parish, Louisiana, Daryl Begnaud from Louisiana State University, Pat Walsh from the Washington, D.C. Fire Department. We all became the development team and started to develop the hazmat programs down there. So was doing that for quite a bit. And then I went on and I was teaching at Louisiana State University and some other universities around the United States and teaching hazmat. And so the more I learned, the more I knew I needed to learn because it just became impossible to keep up with everything. But one of the interesting things is when I was teaching down at the National Fire Academy, I had a student from California come into the class, and he was so impressed with me, he brought me back to California to teach with him, and his name was Jim O'Donnell. Do you know who that is?
I do.
Yes. Yes. So me and Jim have been very good friends for a long time. As a matter of fact, even Bruce and me are friends for a long time. We go back, oh God, years. We go back to the early 80s together. So it was all of that. And then, through all of this going to schools and and learning stuff. It just made it so much easier to do things. Even like when the USAR team was first formed. When we first formed the USAR team in New York City, there was a core group of 10 New York City firefighters who were involved in that. Ray Downey, John Paolillo, Jack Fanning, Eddie Beban, Hugo Harold, myself, Charlie Wells from EMS, Jimmy Booth from EMS, and one of the things that I did because of all of my training and stuff, I actually wrote the USAR's training program, at least, well, most of the hazardous materials section, but I wrote parts of the logistics section and stuff like that too. So I ended up going to Oklahoma. I ended up going to Atlanta and a few other deployments with the USAR team. So Hazmat for me, by doing all the training, opened a tremendous amount of doors. And a lot of that I attribute to my hazmat training. If I didn't have the hazmat training, I certainly wouldn't have did a lot of that stuff, you know?
I couldn't agree more. That's it definitely opened many opportunities on our end as well. So I can understand where it has a place in your heart. I've got two questions for you, Phil. They both come from listeners. The first is a previous member of Hazmat 1, Tony Carbone. He says hello, and he asks, with the caveat previous, many Hazmat teams received grants to fund equipment in the past years. Now, years later, funds for maintenance and training are not there. Any recommendations of routes to take using the possibilities through codes and standards to acquire funds necessary to maintain and or increase capacities?
Well, I think one of the things that could be utilized, and I don't think enough people do, is get somebody in your department or in your staff to do grant writing or to research grants and stuff like that, because that's one of the sources. Also, anytime you can get federal or state money for a program, you might talk to some local politicians who might see the need for a certain type of procedure or protocol, and they might be able to find the funding for you. So that's one way it can be done. Today, that's usually, you see, a lot of the terrorism money, if you look at almost everything New York City has now in terms of domestic preparedness, a lot of that stuff came because of terrorism money. And not just in hazmat. Look at our Marine Division. If you go back to our Marine Division and look at it pre-terrorism,
right.
Our boats were old. Some of the boats were 50 years old. You look at that Marine Division today, it is the state of the art in terms of equipment, staffing, and all of that stuff. But that, the maintaining what you have is the difficult thing now. You build 25 CPC companies, you build 25 decon engines, you build all of these squads. You not only have to train them, equip them, I'm going to say keep them entertained. And what I mean by keep them entertained is if you don't have work for them to do, they're just going to wither away.
Yep.
They're just going to wither away. So if you can't include them in your response policies, make sure that they have enough activity to keep them busy, the stuff is going to fall by the wayside.
So then the second question was from Rick Emery, and he's requesting us to ask about a member who fell in the water wearing a level A suit.
Oh, yes. Well, remember before when I talked to you about he didn't fall in the water, he deliberately jumped in the water. Okay. So
Okay.
Rick was being kind. Okay.
Oh, okay. I actually don't know this story. I don't think so.
Yes. Well, I was like I said, I was down at the National Fire Academy. I was working with Jim Covington, and I said, "Look, Jim," I said, we talk all the time about, capabilities and limitations in chemical protective clothing. I says, New York City is a city of violence. I says, it's not uncommon for us to have an incident on or near the water. I said, what happens if a guy falls in the water in a chemical protective suit? I said, we need to know what happens to that guy if that happens. And we not only need to know, but we also got to tell him what we want him to do if that happens. You're falling in the East River in a level A suit, the tide is just going to take you. So if you run out of air inside of that suit, if you can't open that suit and get out and swim, you're going to suffocate and die if somebody doesn't get to you. Because that's one of the things that people don't fully understand about level A chemical protective clothing. You are inside an oxygen deficient atmosphere if you run out of air. So the first thing that happens is, can you take your mask off and breathe the air inside of the suit? If you can breathe the air inside of the suit, how much air do you have inside of the suit? Is the suit buoyant? Once you open the suit, are you going to be buoyant or are you going to sink to the thing? So we needed to know a number of those things. So at the National Fire Academy, with Jim Covington's permission, we actually ran a seminar once where we took a class after their regular class. At night, we took some level A suits and we went to the NFA pool, and we let some guys get in the pool in the level A suits and try to maneuver around, see what they could do, see if they could open the suit, and so on and so forth. Because like I said, you're supposed to know the capabilities and limitations of your device. You wouldn't jump out of a plane with a parachute and not know what to do if you got tangled, right? You make a mistake there, it could be fatal. Well, the same thing happens in chemical protective clothing. You could be in chemical protective clothing and you're in a building. You get disoriented. You get lost. You can't find your way out. You run out of air in the suit. What do? Or the suit is caught on something, snagged on something, and you can't see it. How do you run the risk of being contaminated and getting yourself out of the suit so that you can escape?
So what did you guys learn from that experience? Was there any aha moments?
There's a few things. When I teach people chemical protective clothing, okay, I not only taught them how to get in the suit, I taught them how to get out of the suit by themselves. Because I didn't feel it was right to put somebody in a potential life-threatening environment and not know what to do if something went wrong. I wanted guys to have the confidence to know that they could open the suit, do what they had to do, and get away if they had to. What happens if you're in an area and the wall gets breached? There's an explosion and you can't get out now, and now you got to do the reduced profile maneuver with the level A suit on with your breathing apparatus. Can you do it? Can you get through a narrow area? And these were some of the things that I was teaching our guys down at the National Fire Academy, is that, it is a protective device, the suit, but it is also something that could cause your demise if you don't know what to do when you're wearing it. Now everybody for the most point is buoyant when the suit is inflated and stuff like that. However, when you open the suit, it's a different story. It depends on your body fat content. It depends on what other equipment you have inside of the suit. Is it going to pull you down? Are you going to be able to maneuver out of the suit? Now, one of the things that we learned at the National Fire Academy, or that we practiced, was to take the suit off in the pool, so that guys knew that they could take the suit off and swim away safely. And what that did was it built confidence, because now when I'm wearing the suit, the time to find out what you can do and not do in the suit is not when you have a problem. It's before you have the problem. It's before you have the problem. So you need to do these things. And I'll tell you, that's probably a lost art for hazmat teams today is running their people through a course where they teach them about the capabilities and limitations of wearing level A. Makes sense?
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. What in the process of going from then to now, what other times did you have to take that same mindset and say, well, we don't have the answers to this, we need to figure it out?
I did that was there were a number of anhydrous ammonia explosions around the United States where hazmat teams had went into areas and had to work their way out. And in one particular incident, I forget where it was, I'm not sure what city it was, but there was a hole in the wall where the guy actually had to reduce his profile to get through the hole in the wall, to get to the other side, to get somewhere where it was safe. And he couldn't do that because, number one, he didn't know how to do the reduced profile, which we teach in the New York City Fire Department to all of our people who wear breathing apparatus. And obviously he didn't do it in chemical protective clothing, so he couldn't get through the space. Now, getting back to your question, would you repeat that again?
That same mindset of, well, we don't have an answer to the question, so let's figure it out. What are some other examples and the stories behind them that brought you from a, hey, we don't know this information, to figuring out the information?
Well, I think that when you always have to look at what ifs, okay? And remember when I said you weigh hazards and risks?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. When you're asking your people to do anything with any piece of equipment, any protective clothing, you always have to say to yourself, what's the worst possible thing that could happen? Is it possible for these guys to replicate that? And what is the counter for that? If we know that this could happen, what are we going to do to counter it? What are we going to train our people to do to counter that particular problem? Make sense?
It does make sense.
Now, anytime they got injured, and that this was a very good thing that safety used to do. Safety would, anytime a fireman was injured or a firefighter, fire officer, the first thing that they would do was impound that person's protective clothing. Why? Well,
because they want to examine it to see if the PPE failed or if the person failed.
That's right, Mike. But here's the big reason, the big dollar reason why. If you have a fireman who's using a glove and he has a burn using that glove, and the glove is defective, and you issue that glove to 9,000 other firefighters, you have to replace 9,000 sets of gloves. You get where I'm coming from?
Yes.
So sometimes things can have a huge, huge impact. When I was the health and safety officer for the UFA, Chief Hay came to me once and he said, look, he says, I want to show you this pair of pants. He says, it's ripped. And he shows me the pants. And I said, okay. He said, this is impossible to happen. First off, the material is rip stop. And it's a straight cut. It's not a jagged cut. It's not ripped. It's not torn. And it's in the crotch area. And he showed, upon closer inspection, I look at it, and you could see the teeth marks from a vise in the pants. So what had happened was this. It was a firefighter. He was assigned to a truck. They didn't have truck pants, so they gave him a set of engine pants, and he didn't like them when he went to the quartermaster. So when he got back to the firehouse, he put them in a vise, and he pulled one side, and he cut the other side with a razor blade, and they ripped. Now he returns them. So Chief Hay says to me, Phil, he says, first off, if the guy ripped this like this, if it ripped like this and he wasn't injured, it's impossible. It's impossible for him to have this kind of tear in his protective clothing without having some kind of serious groin injury. Mm. I said, I agree with you. He says, I'm going to leave this in your hands. We're not giving him a new set. He's going to go and buy a new set. So I go to the firehouse. I get the guy. I say, look, I'm not going to make a big thing of this. Chief Hayes not making a big thing of this. But I'll tell you, if some other chiefs were down there and found this out, you'd be getting charges right now. He says, I didn't do nothing. I says, come with me. And I go. I says, where's your workbench in the firehouse? Takes me to the workbench. I take the pants and I say, you see these? These are teeth marks here. I said, you see that vise there? Those are the teeth on that vise. I said, I suggest you go and buy yourself a new pair of pants and keep quiet. Otherwise, you're going to be in serious trouble. But, and I'm only telling you that for a reason, is that you know, like when anyone wears protective clothing and they get injured and that clothing gets impounded, that's part of the reason it's getting impounded, because if the equipment is defective, it's not just defective for this individual, it's defective for everybody.
Right. And I do believe we actually had that issue with the gloves, probably at the time that you were, yeah.
So we did have an issue with the gloves. So those are things that we want to try and avoid. You know what I'm saying?
What were some of the big moments in your, like, I don't know how to phrase this right. I've had a lot of like, holy crap, I'm an idiot for doing that moments, like where I learned huge lessons. Talk about them all the time on the air. What were some of your, if you had any, moments where, you know, you were completely wrong and you definitely realized that at the worst possible moment, and it was like a life lesson for you?
We were working on, we had an acetylene tank that was on fire. And it was burning out of the two vent plugs at the top. It was a 150-pound acetylene cylinder. You with me?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So at the time, one of our procedures was to you keep the tank cool. And once the flame, you know, like when the flame is burning pretty high above the fusible plug, there's a lot of pressure there. Mm-hmm. So we let the pressure get down. We keep water on the tank to keep it cool. We allow it to continue to burn because it's in an area where we can't extinguish it yet. And then when it gets down, when the base of the flame gets down close to where the fusible plug is, if we knock the fire down, we used to take golf tees and stick them into the fusible plugs to stop the rest of the residual gas coming out. So what happened was we were putting water on this tank. Actually, the engine company was putting water on it. Me and the other entry person were going to go in and we were going to now plug the leaks. Okay. So the flame is burning low next to the tank. We took a golf tee, put it in one of the fusible plugs, tapped it in. That one was closed off. When we started to go to do the other one, even though the fire was out, they had taken the water off the tank and it was still hot enough. When I went to put the second tee in, it flashed and I was like in a complete fireball. Luckily for me, I was in turnout gear and fully masked up, and the engine company was able to put water on me right away. But the tank was still too hot to have done that procedure. And I learned my lesson that if I was going to do that again and plug a safety device, number one, I better make sure that there's not a lot of pressure in the tank when I'm doing something like that. And number two, we keep water continuously on the tank to keep it cool as possible. Because afterwards, I had seen that as we put water on it, as soon as we removed the water, the tank dried up instantly. So it was still red hot, if you will. You know what I'm
Sure,
saying?
sure. Because there
Yeah,
wouldn't
so-
have been really access to thermal imaging cameras back then. So the only way you'd know if there was chemical reaction happening within that tank would be.
I can't run because if I didn't, I was screwed. Yeah. So. Yeah. So and that also goes to the fact that like one of the things too, like when we were doing dangerous operations like that, or when we were doing like propane tanks that were leaking and stuff like that were on fire. One of the things that I thought was always important is, we have an engine company with a hose line. These guys are not hazmat guys, all right? Before I went in to plug a leak, I would always go over to the nozzle guy and the backup guy and say, look, guys, this is what I'm going to do. If anything goes wrong, I'm going to run this way. And we always used to have two lines. One line on the container and the problem, the other line on the personnel. So you would say to the guys, you make sure you keep your line on the container. You make sure you keep your line following me. Make sense?
Makes sense.
Yeah, so that's what we used to do.
You know what? I can't. I don't know what to even say because I'm sitting here. I'm like, I'm talking to you guys, and I'm listening to all these stories, and I'm like, there is so much crap here. I didn't even think about knowing. It's almost like, holy crap.
What would you say in the grant, besides, because you absolutely had this huge presence within the FDNY, did any of that transfer over to the national stage when it came to the evolution of NFPA and OSHA?
I was on NFPA 472 for a while, not long, but I was there. And, one of the things that gives you a lot of credibility, whether you deserve it or not, is when you come from a big department like Chicago, like LA, like New York. A lot of the smaller departments respect you for a variety of reasons. And one of the reasons is, like for New York City, is just the volume of calls that we do. Like you look at, I'm working on a history of hazmat right now for the company. And one of the things that I look at is the WNYFs and the annual history of runs and workers. And when you look at some of the amounts of runs and workers that we did in comparison to some of the other hazmat teams around the country, we do an astronomical amount of hazmat calls. And today, like when we first started, the big thing for us was overturned gasoline tankers. That was like one of our big runs, and we would do that all the time. Or illegal dumping. Illegal dumping was another big thing that we used to do a lot of. But today, what are these guys doing? They're doing the e-bikes and the batteries.
Lithium-ion batteries.
So the workload has changed significantly. There's a lot of things that, and part of the reason too is there's a lot more units today in the job who have monitoring and detection equipment. So chief officers are not going to call hazmat for every call now because they have companies closer to them that have some of the same equipment or similar equipment and can give them, some of the same answers or results. In the beginning, like I tell you, it's so funny when hazmat first went online. Some of the chiefs, we were so new to the job. Some of the chiefs would actually call us to go to their battalions, and they would have a battalion drill and just want to see the equipment on the rig. And we'd get to incidents, and the chief would be at the incident commander, and the resource guy would go, Chief, somebody at headquarters wants to talk to you on the hazmat rig. He says, what do you mean? They want to talk to me on the radio? No, there's a cell phone in there. They want to talk. You guys have a cell phone? Yeah. or you'd say, Chief, we'll give you the hazmat report right now. What do you mean you give me the hazmat report now? You got to go back and type it. No, it's already typed on the rigs. It's being printed right now. You know, they didn't understand that we had all of that stuff. You know,
Yep.
and
So I do have a couple of pictures that you threw to us, so I'm gonna do my best. Tell us that.
Okay. If you look in the center, right where there's this is to certify that. You know, in the beginning, the divers from Rescue 1 had a dive pin. And when we started Hazmat, I went to the guy in Rescue 5. His name is John Thomas. I said, John, how did you go about doing this? Because I want to do something similar for Hazmat. So he explained what the procedure was and stuff like that. So what I did was I wrote letters up the chain of command and said, we need to get a hazmat pin. We need to make it more professional. We should have certain standards of what guys have to, what courses they have to take in order to get the pin and so on and so forth. So I made a whole list, went up the chain of command, came back down. They wanted changes, went back up the chain of command, came back down, wanted changes. And so it was finally decided, they agreed that they were going to allow us to have a pin for hazmat. So I designed this pin. We had it made by a company in Manhattan called Deegis and Cluss. They made 800 of them. And then the job wanted us to pay for them. And I said, no way are we paying for them. I said, you're making us go through all of this shit to learn all of this stuff. You guys are paying for them. So I made the job pay for the first hazmat pins, and that's what they were. Now, this one here, the pin without the star was given to all of the guys who completed the technician course. The ones with the stars on it were for all of the people who were teaching the technicians and specialists.
I didn't know there was a difference.
There is a difference, yes. So there's ones with a star and ones without a star. The star is for the instructors.
I don't think I ever got one with a star, just as an FYI.
I did.
You did.
And we kept a record of it too. Like if you went to the Office Record Journal, there's actually a page in the back of the book where it has the actual order that was approved under, and then some people were grandfathered in the beginning, and then it was supposed to be exclusively for hazmat, but now I think everybody in SOC who takes the training and gets through the training is authorized to wear it. Now, the ring, that was another first. Being a charter member of the New York City Fire Company is rather unique. Most of the companies were over 100 years old. Like people will say, well, the squads are new. No, the squads were around for a long time. So the squads were just reinstituted. The rescue companies were around for a long time. As a matter of fact, the 5 rescues in hazmat were the original rescue services. That was before anything else came around. It was the 5 and us. So the ring was purchased for all of the charter members in the company, and each of the charter members had gotten a ring. So I usually try not to wear mine because it's precious to me, and they won't remake them anymore after that. So I only wear it for special occasions, but you'll find a few of the guys still with that. Now, at the time, these were the 5 suits that we wore in hazmat. We had the level B that John Olenicki is wearing with the helmet, and Phil Hudak is wearing what we would wear for asbestos, and then Rick Gimbel is in one of the level A's. We had at one time, we had the largest chemical inventory in the country of hazmat suits outside of the military. So if you went, at one time, we had close to 100 suits. of different types.
Different type, 100 different types of suits.
No, not 100 different types of suits. Over 100 suits. I think we had 3 different types of level A suits.
Oh, okay.
At one time. 3 level, but we had, we had in our inventory, we had hundreds of suits.
Sure.
Between Bay, level A's, B's, and C's and stuff like that. Yeah. And then that was Jack McLaughlin and the flash protection, and then me, obviously, in the jumpsuits. That was another thing that we did. The jumpsuits, they were actually Navy flight suits, and they were fire retardant. And what we did was when we wore the level A suits, we wore the jumpsuits inside of the level A's, so that if we did get burned, the level A suit would stick to the fire retardant coveralls, not to our skin. So we wore a Nomex hood, we wore Nomex gloves inside of the suit, plus the Nomex jumpsuit. Okay. Just a level B operation down in Manhattan, just getting ready with one of the meters to go in.
Now, okay, hold on. What? Let's. I want to focus on the meter. What in God's name is that?
That was called the HNU.
What did it do?
It monitored organic vapors, not necessarily flammable.
So, like the PID, like a modern PID.
Yeah.
Okay. That is, we talk sometimes in classes about, metering priorities, and this is such a perfect example where we would say, like, we used to talk about metering priorities so much because you could only bring in like 1 meter at a time, whereas like nowadays you could bring in everything from a little bucket, but that is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, well, what we did too was we brought in more than one meter at a time. We would like one entry guy might carry 2 meters, another guy, the other entry guy might carry 2 meters too. For unknowns. For an unknown. If we had some kind of idea what we're going into, we bring a meter specific for that. This is out at the Rock. That's myself, Joe Iovino, John Olenicki, and Jack Hack. Yeah. And basically, that's out at the Rock, and we have an overturned gasoline tanker there, and we're practicing fuel transfer operations there, plus grounding and bonding. You see, and that's what I was talking about before, like with training, when you were talking about mission-specific training. Like, if you're going to do an operation like this where you have a gasoline tanker overturned, how many different components or disciplines are required there? You have to know grounding and bonding operations. You have to know air monitoring, where to search. You have to know fuel transfer, how the pumps work and stuff. You actually need to know the nomenclature on the container itself and how all of the systems work. So anytime you tell me like we're going to do something mission specific, just that alone there is more than an hour or two's work. You know what I'm saying? Or a day's work in terms of training and stuff.
I was going to say it's a couple of days worth of training, just each one of those disciplines put together. Sure. Right.
Now this down at the National Fire Academy. This is one of my classes down there. In the very beginning, we actually used to train guys to wear level A suits down there. But the hands-on training stopped after a while. They came up with a new policy where we're not going to teach hands-on. We're just going to do classroom stuff. So this is like one of the early classes where we actually got in chemical protective clothing. We actually let them fix leaks. These are the same types of chemical protective clothing that we took to the pool and tried out. And you'll notice that even though they're different colors, they're all from different suit manufacturers who would drop them off at the National Fire Academy so that company officers and chief officers going through the Hazmat programs could see some of these and possibly go back to their departments and buy them. It was just a little marketing on their part.
Would this have been pre 1991, 1990?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
this was 85, 86, sometime around there.
Okay.
Yeah.
What made them drop the hands-on at the academy?
Liability. And the problem with hands-on is you didn't have enough time to get everybody through every piece of hands-on. So like some guys would wear the level A suits, other guys would not be able to, that kind of stuff. This is my favorite hazmat picture, I have to tell you. And this one has a story behind it too. In the very beginning, we were going through a phase where a lot of people didn't know about us, and we were having the media come in and do a lot of work with us. We appeared in Penthouse magazine in 1985. We were in a full spread there. There was about 14 pages. We were in Popular Mechanics. We were in National Geographic World. And this photo shoot was actually taken at the Rock. And that picture that you had shown earlier of the four of us standing in front of the tanker that was overturned with the transfer pump and all of that stuff, that black and white photo from the Academy. Well, this is that same tanker. Now, what they wanted was they wanted two guys with level A's, and they were going to light the gasoline tanker that was behind us on fire. Okay. And because they wanted the fire as the backdrop. So me and Larry were selected as the most photogenic people for this picture. Now, I got to tell you, the guys who were with the guys in the company who weren't selected, they were the ones who were running this fire behind us, and they were making it hot.
I would do the same thing.
The hair on mine and Larry's necks was singed. That's how close we were to the fire. And I think the two suits that were actually, half donning had to be condemned after this photo shoot.
Yeah,
they were no longer usable.
I would be disappointed if I was controlling that fire and I didn't melt your suit.
Well, these guys, the guys, they did an admirable job. But to Larry and my credit, we hung in there like troopers, and they got the shot. But that was the shot, me and Larry. Yeah. I put this picture in because I thought it was good to show that when we first started in hazmat, there's resistance to everything. And the front piece on the right, where it has hazmat on the top on the insert.
Okay.
I'm sorry. On the left, I'm sorry. On the way I'm looking at it.
Without the NFPA.
The one that has the hazmat on the top.
Okay.
That was the original front piece for hazmat. Now, when we first got that, okay, obviously we were part of Rescue Services. Rescue 1 was there, and they felt that this would too closely resemble Rescue 1, and there could be a lot of confusion about that. So a few months into us operating, I would say we started in October. I'm going to say by December, we were to the other front piece. So the other front piece was what is the current front piece now for hazmat. Yes. Obviously, we stayed with the blue because we were part of the original Rescue Services. So it's just us and the rescue companies who have the blue. The squads have yellow, and the other colors of all the other companies and stuff like that. But that was one of the things that changed. So a lot of people didn't even know that we had that first front piece there, but that was the original front piece.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Can you believe it's almost 2 hours?
I don't know how long you do this for. Is that good?
2 hours.
We'd do it for about
great.
2 hours.
Okay.
That's great. I tell you what, we're going to probably wrap it up in a minute or two, but obviously there's still a lot of people on watching this thing, so obviously we're going to have you back on. Phil,
Yeah, and
honestly, it
next
was a pleasure.
next time, what I'll do is I'll try and answer some of the questions you sent me.
We didn't even
We'll
get to the
try and get some of
questions.
them done. We didn't even get to the questions.
We did that on purpose to
Unbelievable.
force you to come back.
I really enjoyed being with you guys. Obviously, Mike, you and Bob are friends of mine, so that makes this all a lot easier. When you're doing stuff like this.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
It's.
But I will say one thing before we get off. Hazmat has taught me a great deal. Up until 9/11, between teaching and working, I was away 15 days a month up until 9/11. And then after 9/11, I stopped a lot of this stuff. So you guys know for personal reasons why I stopped. But this is an exciting career field. A lot of guys bang nails, do cement work and stuff like that. This was my chosen second career, doing hazmat, teaching hazmat. And it was very rewarding. I got to see a lot of the country. I got to see a lot of unique things. And I'm very grateful for my time in hazmat and the people I met and worked with there.
I was lucky enough to have caught the tail end of your career, and it was enough to be inspired to understand laws, rules, and regulations, open up the OSHA books. For those that are out there that are either starting or they got a couple years in, what advice would you give them to be able to start getting to the next level in their hazmat career?
I think that what you said is probably the way to go. I would start with look at things like the federal regulations and why we do certain things, especially the ones by labor, which is 29 CFR. Those ones will definitely put you on the right path to writing good SOPs, learning what you need to do. Also, staying up with the current standards like NFPA 472 and stuff like that. Those are your best ways to stay competent and stay safe. Make sense?
Unbelievable.
Words to live by. Thank you so much, Phil, for coming on.
Thanks,
my
Phil.
pleasure.
Honestly, hopefully we'll get you back on real soon. But anybody got questions or anything else, just email us. You can send it to me and I'll forward it on to Phil. It's bob@thehazmatguys.com. We'll send it over. And thanks. We'll see you guys out there.
Okay.